We can start. No.
Yes, sir. The room is cold.
We said with less than 20 people in the room, we don't start. At least. Your last opportunity to leave before. To come in. Of course. Oh, well, I think it's 3:40. We can get started. Good afternoon. Welcome, everyone. My name is Gabriele Fattorelli. I work as a director in evaluation at the EBRD, European Bank for Reconstruction and Development. I have the pleasure to moderate this great panel discussion, which is the last one of the day, the only thing between us and the drinks, but I promise will be an interesting one. Okay, we entitled this panel discussion "Evidence in Action: Driving the Private Sector Resilience Through Crisis," and I think it's a very timely topic to discuss. Evaluation is definitely changing, and because of a number of geopolitical, external factors, the technological innovation, and so on and so forth. So the question that we would like to address today is where we are headed, where we are going to, and what that means for evaluators, especially when we engage with the private sector, the non-sovereign operations, that is probably the most affected by all these changes and crises. So to address this difficult question, we have this outstanding panel that I will introduce in a second. But first, let me, since it's the last event of the day, let me share with you what we plan. We will have first a very, very short, I promise, presentation by a colleague that will set the scene for the discussion. And then we will have 2 rounds of questions for our panelists. Each one, I will ask you please to come in, share your views, ask questions, and take advantage of the discussion. So please be prepared to share some reflection on that. And maybe now it's the time I introduce indeed this fantastic panel, starting from my colleague and friend, Veronika Salzerozak, Chief Evaluator at the EBRD, the European Bank for Reconstruction and Development. Before Veronika, you were also DDG, as we say here, Deputy Director General at the Asian Development Bank in the Evaluation Department. But may I also say that you were among the initiators of this beautiful tradition of the Asian Evaluation Week, so 10 years ago. So I can imagine it's a big emotional thing for you to be here. Welcome, thank you very much, Veronika, for being here. Then Tanya Rajadel, she's an evaluation expert at the European Investment Bank Group. Tanya is the head of the Evaluation Knowledge Management Division, but you also, Tanya, have a very long trajectory in conducting and leading complex and thematic evaluation for the AIIB group. And then Eskender Zeleke, head of the Independent Evaluation Function at the AIIB, the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank. Eskender also held very senior roles with a number of multilateral organizations, the African Development Bank, the World Bank Group, the IFC. I also noticed, Eskender, that you work for the Department of Energy at the US government.
That's where I started.
Very, very interesting. Welcome, Eskender. Thank you very much for being here. And Megan Kennedy-Chouane, head of evaluation at the OECD DAC, the Development Assistance Committee. Megan managed the DAC network on development evaluation. She did work on climate crisis, and especially she coordinates the COVID-19 Global Evaluation Coalition. So thank you, Megan, for being here, and welcome. And my colleague Natalia Kryg. She is an economist and an evaluator, and she led the main evaluations about the EBRD response to crisis. And also Natalia, when was seconded at the IMF, she contributed to the important IMF, the important evaluation of the IMF pandemic response. So very welcome, Natalia, thank you for being here. I will leave the floor actually to you in a second, but I promised to have a sort of an engagement with you, dear colleagues in the audience. So we thought to ask you, first of all, to set the scene for this discussion. If you can please take a very short survey for us. So you see there the QR code, or you can go to the website menti.com and enter the code you see there, 86703257, and answer to with one word to this question. What comes to your mind when you think about evaluation in time of crisis? What is the first word that comes to your mind? It can be, I don't know, influential, powerful, useless, I don't know. So please, in one word, think about what comes to your mind when you think about evaluation in time of crisis. And the word result should come on the screen very quickly. Wonderful. It works. We were a bit worried about it. Okay, I see at the very center oxymoron. Interesting. Challenging. Difficult, I mean, that is always evaluation difficulties. It's always professional. I don't know if you can read there also. Inclusive, very important. Opportunity. Transformative as well. Hopefully impactful. But from what I see, the main word is actually challenging. Yes, it's always the case. Okay, thank you for that. Let's keep that in mind. Sorry, let's keep that in mind. And maybe I should leave the floor to you, Nat, for a very quick, short presentation. A mind that is challenging.
It's my second time in China, so therefore I will speak in English. My Chinese is not good enough. My role here is to set up the scene for the panel discussion with our distinguished panelists which will follow. I will provide you with the story of EBRD, which stands for European Bank for Reconstruction and Development. So let me begin by building the story of who we are, then providing you with the example of evaluation approach we used, especially during the pandemic, and finishing with my humble view of the 6 lessons learned. And I'm sure our panelists will correct me when I finish presenting. So in terms of context, I would like to argue that EBRD is a crisis-driven institution and has been shaped by crisis and that has embedded crisis into our DNA. It's everything, in the locations where we operate, in our strategies, in the way we interact, evaluations, and assess private sector intervention by institutions. Some of you may know our background, others may not. We were set up in early 1990s to face the challenge of transition shock, which the initial country operation faced. So that was already first shock we had there in our mandate from day number 1. Later on, we obviously were hit by global financial crisis. As many of you may know, we were at the time still kind of focused in Central and Eastern Europe, but over time expanded to countries in Asia. We now have over 12 countries operating in the Asian continent, and very recently expanded to Africa, which is even more fragile context for operations going forward. Later on, obviously, we've got the pandemic, which hit us pretty hard, and I will share some insights about the evaluation approach we took to evaluate the response to the pandemic. And then, virtually within a couple of weeks, when we finished evaluating pandemic, we've got the war in Ukraine, which was another evaluation challenge, and we'll have some insights on that to share with you. And today, we live in a world where there are more than one crisis hitting many of our kinds of operations, and we are battling as evaluators with the role to evaluate all of them in one go. to provide insightful insight for our management and the board. But going forward is a big challenge. Uncertainty is the new norm. We are very much no doubt in most of our country operations. The answer what to do is not clear, and the same with our evaluation approaches. That's why we're so happy to have our collaborative panel where we'll exchange insights on what to do going forward, because as we very much know, it's very hard to predict what will come next. With that, let me walk you through an example of our COVID-19 evaluation. We began pretty early. Some of you from your institution may have evaluated the response to the pandemic later. We were there already in May 2021, collecting evidence, mostly remotely because of the challenges the pandemic put on us. We published our first phase evaluation product, which was part of real-time evaluation. On your desk, I left some leaflets which you can scan with your phone and get the full report on what real-time evaluation is. So one of the tools you could use there is rapid assessment. That's what we did. We published in January 2022, obviously with imperfect data, imperfect answers, but we decided that anything is good at the time where our decision makers need some insights. Because of that, we had to follow up. We follow up shortly after with impact evaluation, first time ever, together with 3IE, Initiative for Impact Evaluation. We try to provide some more robust evidence for our management and the board. But before we start working on it, we had another crisis, the Ukraine, which hit us. Virtually within weeks, our board and management came to us asking for insights, what to do, how to respond to Ukraine. And our panel managing director, Veronique, will share more to you what was happening behind the closed door of decision making and how our COVID-19 lessons were used to shape the response to the war in Ukraine. COVID-19 counterfactual was obviously empirically driven method, but we also had some other surveys in Uzbekistan, actually, with all of the banks operating there to assess more deeply what the institutions have done, whether that was relevant, useful, coherent with external stakeholders on the ground and internal as well. And because that evaluation insight was very technical, we had to repackage it to make it more operationally useful for our management. And that's why we produced evaluation learning note, which was a knowledge product, synthesis of what we already produced, but put in very much catchy framework. It's public document. It's again on your desk. You will see a leaflet to get the full report, and it's structured by what operations could do before the crisis hits, while it's already ongoing, and what could be done after the crisis is over. So I hope you find that note interesting. And then we still plan to do more. Obviously, we had the war in Ukraine response package ongoing, reconstruction element part of it. We also have energy crisis in many of our countries. I mentioned the expansion to Sub-Saharan Africa. There, obviously, climate crisis is a huge concern. So we're already producing more evaluation that will be published very shortly on that. So we want to bring all of this evidence together in a synthesis format, hopefully in 2022, to again, reinforce the lessons we have and show to stakeholders how relevant evaluation could be to their decision makers going forward. I left the question mark on the ongoing evaluation efforts also because of other products we're producing on additionality. It's a jargon we all use in our multinationals. Some of you may know what it means. It basically means that our institutions has to be present on the market in order to provide something which is not there to avoid crowding out. For us, it's private sector participation. And together with the Evaluation Cooperation Group, under the leadership of the European Investment Bank, we're looking back at this concept, trying to make it more relevant to the future we're facing, because this is a very important concept for us to have it grasped as evaluators, and there are challenges associated with that as well. For our institutions, additionality is one of the eligibility criteria for the institutions to intervene in the market. Therefore, it's a very important for us to evaluate a clear meaning of this concept and applications, guidance for evaluators how to evaluate it. With that, I would like to leave you with six, in my humble view, 6 lessons from all of this experience, or shall I say, Jinian Zongji. I probably got it wrong. It's supposed to mean lessons learned. And because I got it wrong, it means my lessons are not right, and the panel will definitely correct me. So my first lessons to leave you with, based on our experience from EBRD, is speed over perfection. Obviously, crisis will remain here, and it will mean that our evidence is never complete. We cannot wait for all the data to be there in place for us to evaluate. We have to provide evidence, because timely evidence is much more useful and valuable to our stakeholder than perfect, complete picture. More on that to come during the discussion. Number 2 is learning. It's about our learning prioritization over blaming, or one may call it accountability. And it's closely related to number 4, which links to insights over recommendations. In our institutions, we issue recommendations very often as a traditional way. But during crisis, we find out that the suggestions replace in an informal fashion to our management are much more useful and much more likely to be utilized if it not come with a rigid to-do list, which quite often becomes outdated as the crisis evolves, and more on that to follow during panel discussion. But underlying to number 2 and 4 is relationship with people, with our management, and that's very definitely the key we will share with you during the discussions. Number 3 is working together. Panel 2, as you saw from the session takeaway, will talk about collaboration. We believe, based on our experience, collaboration is the currency of credibility. It really helped us to achieve what we achieved with our management and board, and we definitely will continue collaborating and eager to engage with you as well. Number 5 is about flexibility in our approach. Real-time evaluation is one method which is quite flexible, and we noticed that we'll be using more of it going forward. So we're very happy that we have the guidance from RT issue under evaluation cooperation group, which will provide us with rules to follow, so we don't forget when we're completely evaluating things, how to do it things in a robust way. And number 6 to leave you with is the wider lens. We are here at the multinational level, but we also have bilateral stakeholders to deal with. And it's very important for our evaluation to apply this wider lens, cross-country, cross-institution, cross-sector. And we very much need to now remember to have that in all of our evaluations. So with that, which is a perfect list, I will leave it to our distinguished panelists to correct me. Thank you.
Well done, Natalia. You promised to do in 3 minutes. You did in 2 minutes and a half. Well done. Let me now turn to our panelists. And indeed, Natalia mentioned a number of crises. Veronica, starting with you, you in the position of chief evaluator, you had experience evaluation work through most of these crises. So maybe can I ask you what you have learned, if you can share with us about using evaluation in a way that is beneficial for the organization in coping with this context of fragility to support private sector resilience, and also how you can ensure that evaluation remains relevant and hopefully influential in such a hectic and challenging context.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much. Not sure it froze. That's it? First again? No. Now it works. Yes, great. So thanks a lot, Gabriele, for the introduction, and also Natalia, because Natalia gave you some of the key elements of our work. What I would like to start with is the fact that I joined EBRD from AIIB in the middle of the crisis. It was in the middle of the pandemic. It was in May 21. So I joined remotely. And at that time, it's not that long ago, but still, I think since 2021, up to now, we've learned a lot. Because at that time, just the fact that we were all working remotely was already a challenge. At that time, it was when we were starting to say, okay, how can we continue to have evaluation while we cannot travel? How can we interview people? And we were putting all of this in place, so it took us by surprise. I think that we all learned collectively already quite a lot since 2021, since the pandemic, because we now are very flexible in the way we interview people. We have hybrid meetings, we can have online interviews. Of course, field visits are still important, but we have evolved a lot. What else have we learned? A few words came up when you were asked the question about what type of words come to your mind when you think of evaluation in crisis. And if I look at my few notes and a few words that I put down, they're very much reflective of, they echo very well what you say. For example, I have challenges, that's the main one that came. I have relevance, I have timing, and I have inclusive. So all of these words were the ones that also came to your mind. If I were to keep only two to discuss today, the first one would be timeliness, and the second one would be trust, and I can develop a bit later. When we talk about evaluation, we often say that it's all about, to be influential, it's all about bringing the right findings or messages or evidence to the right people at the right time. That's true all the time, but I think it's particularly true during a crisis. Because when a crisis happens, we are, of course, always taken off guard. We can prepare, and it's better that we prepare, but we will never know what's coming, and we don't know what the next big crisis will be. There are some ongoing ones that we are unfortunately very well aware of, climate crisis, energy, food security, but we don't know which one will be the next big crisis. What we know is that we won't be fully prepared, but at least it's important that we learn from our recent experiences. And timeliness has been really the key word, because when the COVID-19 crisis happened, there were discussions among evaluators saying somewhere of the thinking that maybe it was not a time for evaluation. It was a time for evaluators to step back, not interfere with the already overworked staff in our institution, and to come later. And then the discussion went to, yes, but we can be very relevant, actually. There is a place, or there is room for us to be relevant, for evaluators to play their role during crisis. But that meant being, maybe, as also Natalia said, not looking for perfection, but looking for relevance and making sure that we were useful. So maybe utility over perfection. And that we could provide findings and evidence on a timely manner. At EBRD, we work mainly with the private sector, as you know, and the private sector doesn't really wait for reports to come 2 or 3 years later. Because if support doesn't work, then companies can even go bankrupt. So it's too late if we come 2 or 3 years later. It might be fine for the institution of EBRD, but it's too late for our clients. So in the session right before this one, there was, I think that Sonia said something about not forgetting for whom we are doing it. So we should not forget when we do an evaluation that the information we want to collect, it's for management, for operation, but it's also for our clients, in our case for the private sector. And they need very quick information, evidence about what can be done. So timeliness is really key. The second point is trust, because of course in time of crisis, management and the private sector, they are overwhelmed with information, overwhelmed with things to do, and they don't necessarily are very receptive about any lessons that you can bring. So it's up to us to be able to provide evidence that's going to be constructive. It's not about blaming, that's what we say too. It's more about providing constructive information, evidence, so that some corrective action can be taken, and the response will be more proactive and more adequate to the demand. And communication is also very important. So engaging with the private sector, engaging with our colleagues during times of crisis needs to be done with a lot of sensitivity. It needs to be not a burden, but we need to be ready to have active listening. So it's an opportunity for them also to share on the spot what they are living, whether they feel that they have all the tools in place to be able to support their clients, and the clients, whether the tools that EBRD is providing are relevant to their needs, and this need may be changing over the course of the crisis. So it's important for us that we remain very sensitive to that we engage in a maybe sensitive way, definitely with our colleagues and our clients, and that we provide information in short notes, easy to capture for them and easy for them to act on. I could say much more, but I am told that I have already spoken too long. So back to you.
Thank you very much. Let me start. Thank you, Pia, for helping taking the time. But Veronica, yes, it is timeliness and trust. You gave really a clear message. And when I was indeed listening to you, I was thinking about the commonalities between EBRD and EIB group, and I come to you, Tanya. As I mentioned, you have led several important evaluations of the EIB's group crisis response, the rapid assessment of the EIB pandemic measure, recently the evaluation of the use of framework loans in disaster and emergency context. How did this evaluation, your evaluation work inform actually the EIB group support the private sector? And if you can elaborate a bit about the key challenges that you face in your team in conducting this evaluation and the lessons that you can derive for other similar institutions to improve future crisis responses. Thank you.
Okay, I think it's working now. Thank you, Gabriele. It's really a pleasure to be here. So indeed, the EBRD and EIB have a lot in common, and one key element is that we are very much focused on support to the private sector. So I'll just share 3 high-level findings from our recent evaluations. And then I'll reflect briefly on what lessons we learned along the way as evaluation functions. Well, first, a common finding of our recent evaluations is that the EIB group was most successful in supporting the private sector in times of crisis when it was able to build on established relationships with counterparts while deploying financial instruments that it already had in its toolkit. Examples of this is that during the pandemic and also at the onset of the war in Ukraine, the EIB was very quick to repurpose existing loans, to waive some of the conditions we usually use for disbursement, to also extend the types of eligibilities for financing, so we could finance working capital or operating expenses, which we usually do not finance through our operations. And this helped us respond to the needs of private sector companies, whether we're big corporates, SMEs, mid-caps, in a very timely way. So this was timely and effective. Conversely, and this is a second finding that came across our various evaluations, is that we were less successful, and by that I mean less timely, when we tried to develop tailor-made solutions in the midst of a crisis. So one good example of this is when the pandemic hit, the EIB set up a pan-European guarantee fund, and it did this in record time. We were able to set it up in about 6 months, which, if you know our institutions, is very, very quick, for our standards. But by the time the guarantee fund was up and running and started really deploying the guarantees, the height of the pandemic crisis had kind of passed. We came a bit after the battle. So this doesn't mean that the fund wasn't useful at the recovery stage, but at that immediate response phase, we were not so good at it. And so this brings me to the third sort of high-level finding that is sort of a common thread across our evaluations, is the element of preparedness. Having a crisis response mechanism in place beforehand is really essential. And this is something that we at the EIB group, unfortunately, did not really have. We had a few scattered guidance notes here and there on conflicts, on economic crisis that we learned from the 2008-2009 crisis, but we didn't have a solid mechanism in place. And one outcome that we are proud of from our evaluations is that through our evaluation recommendations and also our continuous engagement through the various crises that we have gone through with senior management and with the operational staff, the EIB finally, recently last year, developed guidance and a crisis mechanism response. So this defines sort of institutional mechanisms to activate when a crisis occurs. But it's also, and very importantly, it provides, if you like, a bit of a menu of options that the EIB group can use, can tap on when a crisis hits. And of course, adapting this to the type of crisis, the location, the types of counterparts that are effective. So we'll have to still see how it happens in the next time a very big crisis hits, but this for us is a very good step forward. Now, very briefly, what have we learned as an evaluation function along the way? Well, these 3 high-level findings, so of sort of building on our strengths, being mindful of the cost that comes with developing tailored solutions, and the importance of preparedness. These 3 high-level findings actually apply quite well to us as evaluation functions. If we think about building on our strengths, one of our strengths as internal evaluation functions is that, well, we are inside the organization. We know when and how to provide, as Veronique was saying, timely inputs in the format that will speak to senior management, to operational staff. We know how to engage with the right people at the right time. And we also, and we still need to keep working on this, but we're very credible. So we can provide credible insights at the right time and in the right format. So I think that worked quite well. I'm not saying it was easy, but it worked quite well. Where we encountered a challenge, or one of the challenges we encountered, and we touched upon this in Veronique and Natalia's points earlier, is that when the pandemic hit, we suddenly tried to provide real-time evaluations, rapid evaluations, and this, for us, as evaluation functions of MDBs, was very new. And so we were trying to come up with a tailor-made solution in the midst of a crisis, and I think we were right to do it. We made tremendous progress as evaluation functions in doing it, but it came with huge transaction costs. It was difficult to do, but I think we've learned a lot, and we can come back to this in the rest of the discussion. And finally, preparedness. And I must say, I only started really thinking about this when I was preparing for the conference. I realized that as evaluation functions, we have learned a lot through this experience. But I must say that at least our function at the EIB, we do not have a crisis response mechanism in place. We're, I think, counting on the fact that we will bank on the lessons we've learned from how we dealt with these recent crises. And so maybe one point that we might want to discuss with the rest of the panel is how we can be better prepared as evaluation functions for the next crisis that inevitably will occur. And I will stop here. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Tanya. I found your insight on preparedness and engagement really interesting, and maybe we will get back to that if we have a bit of time. Now turning to AIIB, to you, Eskender, we have heard from Veronique and Tanya evaluation about multiple crises. Maybe we can focus now on the response, the EIB response to the COVID-19 pandemic. EIB responded very, very swiftly, and maybe I was interested in a young MDB to some extent. What, from an evaluation perspective, what type of methods, approaches you and your team are undertaking for this evaluation of the EIB response, and any kind of insights or initial findings you may eventually share with us that can inform our discussion. Over to you. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much, Gabriela. So I think we have 3 loaded questions, right? Approach, methodology, and the what worked lessons. So I think first, let me give a context to the audience before I respond to those questions. I think when the pandemic hit us or struck us, AIIB was the youngest institution and only was 3 years old. Despite this, the institution has acted boldly and decisively, actually navigated the crisis and built on success, and immediately established a special purpose vehicle called Crisis Recovery Facility. So under this facility, AIIB financed 68 projects in 26 member countries, both regional and non-regional. And also did an amazing job on how it was so efficient, both on private sector and also public support. So to respond to the questions, Gabriel, what methodology are we adopting? By the way, for full disclosure, the evaluation still is ongoing. We haven't completed it, so my lessons are very from the early observations. So we have adopted two methodological framework, balancing between portfolio analysis, because you can imagine we have 68 projects, both regional and non-regional, over 20 billion investment. So first, we really want to map all those projects along the 4 pillar of objectives, right? Liquidity support, special support to the government, and also safety net support. And once we did the analysis, then we picked 10 projects for a deep dive sample studies based on geographic representation, sector representation, and the financing modality. Because FI has different financing modalities, financial intermediaries, corporate finance for infrastructure clients. So, and then also we looked at from the theory of change layers. What happened to all those liquidity and capital relief? Was it that was channeled to the financial intermediary? Did it sustain job, supply chain, or essential services? Those are the basic things we really want to understand what happened. Because FI normally is a lifespan of credit and all small and medium enterprises. And then also at the third step, we are going to triangulate this with a quantitative analysis of the speed of portfolio, quality of portfolio, and the employment retention. And then also we do with qualitative analysis by stakeholder engagement with our internal investment officers, senior leadership, and also in country visit, which will be soon launched into 5 to 6 countries between October to November to understand the impact on the ground. Those are the methodological framework. Then what have we learned so far? So I think one important lesson is flexibility is vital, as Zeleke also underscored. Timeliness, speed, and even institutional responsiveness. How was AIIB at the younger stage? How did it really act? And what was also the trade-off by putting all its resources and energy on this pandemic recovery CRF? What happened to the other portfolios? What was the trade-off and the opportunity cost? So that's one of the lessons, is flexibility was extremely important, because we couldn't adopt absolutely the OECD criteria. Of course, we looked at effectiveness and the relevance and the sustainability as well. I think the second lesson is framework needs tailoring, because instead of looking at long-term development outcome, this is a crisis. So what is the short-term crisis recovery outcome that we can really look at? How did our portfolio manage, both during the crisis, supply of vaccine and everything, then also post-recovery? So the third and most important lesson, also Zeleke touched upon it, evaluation should be a trusted partner. During crisis, how can you move forward from foresight, to oversight to foresight, from most look at from the learning angle? So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Eskender. Now we have heard about evaluation of multilateral development banks responses, and I would like to turn to you, Megan, to ask you to share with us some thoughts from a slightly different perspective. Maybe first of all, I may ask you to introduce a bit the COVID-19 Global Evaluation Coalition, for those who are not fully familiar with that. But also, maybe you can elaborate a bit about your experience in bringing together so many different actors and players into a crisis context, and what challenges and achievement you encounter and you accomplish in building bridges and forging partnership in such a difficult situation. So thank you, Megan.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much Yes, thank you very much. And I'd like to thank also the colleagues from ADB and AFDI and the People's Republic of China for hosting us here in Xi'an with this excellent conference. And thank you for this panel, because I think it is really important that we continue to draw lessons. So to start by way of introduction, the COVID-19 Global Evaluation Coalition is an international partnership. It was set up as a collaboration between evaluation units in 2020. And we're focused on international cooperation and humanitarian assistance that was provided during the COVID-19 pandemic from 2020 to 2022. But the coalition is continuing its work today. We have about 60 participants in the coalition, and these are evaluation units. I like to say that we have the 4 legs of the table brought together. So we're used to working with, in the OECD context, with the bilateral providers of development cooperation. So you would have, for example, USAID, we heard about this morning, or partners from Germany, Denmark, France, Japan, and others who provide international assistance. And then we have our sister organizations from the multilateral banks, who we've heard from today, and then also the United Nations organizations. But the 4th partners that are often missing at the table are the country governments and the evaluation units within national governments who are working to evaluate their own crisis response mechanisms, and often also involved then in international cooperation and assistance and evaluating those projects. So I think one of the interesting things about COVID-19 was that it was an effort by the global evaluation community to actually come all together. We really had this idea of let's not all reinvent the wheel. Let's not have each different evaluation unit trying to figure out what we should do in the crisis setting. Let's work together. We also built our model off of several previous collaborations. So following the Indian Ocean tsunami in 2004, there was an effort to have a global coalition that evaluated collectively. And I can talk at length about the different efforts why we built on this model, but really the idea was that we could be stronger together than we were individually. So what were some of the elements? And the other thing about what the coalition was, we worked in a phased approach. So we really worked starting out at the beginning, trying to help the different evaluation units continue their work in the crisis context. So sharing evaluation methodologies, as the colleagues have mentioned, also mapping who was carrying out what types of studies or evaluative projects. We also then worked to feed in evidence to the ongoing crisis response. And I think in many ways we didn't try to do real-time evaluation, but rather we realized that even though this was an unprecedented global crisis, many of the lessons that had been identified in previous crises or in previous international assistance efforts could be applied. So for example, and here's where we really saw 2 of the key lessons, I think, from international assistance collaboration during crisis among evaluators. One is that letting the perfect not be the enemy of the good. So you can imagine a group of evaluators, we would get a report from our Canadian colleagues. They said that we have a group of ministers, development ministers, meeting in 2 weeks' time on the subject of food security or on the subject of gender equality in education. What do you have? And so we would go to the coalition members and we would say, send us everything you've got on food security in 1 week's time. And you can imagine the volume of evaluation reports. I remember we had one Dutch colleague on the gender equality briefing, and he said, well, I'm leaving for vacation in 6 hours, but I'll see what I can get you. And so he just sat down and went through, and of course, this was before we had AI, we would have been faster now. He went through all of the evaluation reports that he could of Dutch international assistance, pulling out lessons on gender equality. And the result of that effort was that going into the meeting of development ministers, the Canadian colleagues managed to put a brief with lessons from evaluation. And it would be 8 or 10 key lessons. And these briefs actually ended up being very highly used and highly referenced. Because the 2 things that we heard back was, one, they fit into the moment. As the colleagues said, if we had come up with a really extensive brief that was very peer-reviewed and high quality, 6 weeks later it would have been too late. So what can you get in the time into the decision-making room? And the second thing was that each of these briefs came with a sea of logos of all of the different partner organizations that were involved. And we found that that credibility of having international support and saying, this is not just based on these one evaluation unit trying to speak out, but it's actually consensus across, that strengthened our influence. A couple of other things that I think we learned about what works in the crisis context. One is that it's very hard for us as evaluators to be, as we call it, the tail wagging the dog, which means if our institutions aren't working together programmatically, it's very difficult for us to then work together jointly at the evaluation end of things. So I think sometimes we have to balance between doing our day jobs, but also working together to share lessons. A couple of the other things that we did to really support the process was to think about efficiency. So one thing we saw almost immediately was that the crisis mode opened up a kind of mindset where we saw in our institutions many people who were previously less interested in evaluative evidence suddenly were opened to the idea that they may not have all the answers. And they would therefore turn to their evaluation units and say, can you give us any information about X or Y? And so the evaluation units then found themselves very quickly doing rapid evidence reviews and syntheses. And so we worked with some of the partners, including Germany's DEWAL, to do a mapping of all the syntheses that were being done, because we realized actually a lot of different syntheses were being repeated across all of our evaluation partners. And so we tried to then from there develop a common agenda that would mean that over the years, as we did more individual evaluations, these could then support cross-learning as well. The work of the COVID-19 Coalition, as I said, is not yet complete. So from this phase of building in evidence, we then supported many of the individual evaluations and sharing of lessons. And we also supported several joint evaluations. And these, I think, were also a good example of countries and development institutions working together. So for example, we evaluated the protection of the rights of refugees during the COVID-19 crisis. And that was a joint evaluation between Colombia, Finland, Uganda, and the United Nations refugee group. And so that's a good example of where working together we could actually strengthen and generate evidence that was of global interest, not just for those individual institutions or countries. And right now we're working on completing the work on COVID-19. We are doing strategic joint evaluation of the international cooperation and humanitarian assistance that was provided between 2020 and 2022. And what we're seeing is that there's a lot of lessons here that are applicable not only in crisis time, but also in normal times. And so I thank all of the partners that have been involved in this work over the past 2 years, and you see some images and maybe some people that you recognize also here on the screen. And please do stay tuned. We'd love to share more experiences and more findings from this evaluation.
Thank you very much, Megan, and a lot of food for thought indeed. Now we are a bit tight with the time, but I really would like to hear from our colleagues here in the audience. Any comment, reflection, or question for our panelists, or any kind of experience you would like to share when engaging in evaluation in times of fragility and crisis. Yes, a couple of questions. Thank you. Please, the microphone is there. You can introduce briefly yourself and go ahead. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm Emily Sharp from the Pacific Community. We serve the 22 Pacific Island countries and territories, and I'm so heartfelt to hear about the coalition. Our experience in our members asking us to support them in response in the exploration phase, we found hundreds and hundreds of impact assessments being conducted by each individual, multilateral, bilateral and development partner. So our focal points in ministries were staying up in the evenings to answer the same questions, just worded slightly differently by each partner, because during the day they just had to help their governments respond. So I think, building on your experience of the coalition, I'd love to know how in a preparatory phase we could partner in advance and in anticipation of the next crisis, so that we have agreements around data sharing, around co-conducting assessments and evaluations just recognising the huge burden it is on machineries of government, particularly with small bandwidth in that crisis moment. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Please.
From China Agriculture University. My question goes to Megan particularly because last year I was involved in a joint field investigation trip between China and EU. That was a very exciting trip to Côte d'Ivoire. You know, it's a very open, mutual learning process. And this coalition, I don't know, it's just involved in OECD DAC members. Do you have any plan to reach out to China and other emerging countries? Because during this kind of critical moment, right, to tackle with crisis, building resilience, you know, we need concerted efforts. So that's my question. Thank you.
A very good question. Thank you very much. Megan, then over to you for these two questions.
Yes, thank you both for those questions. I think maybe Emily on this point, you know, I think what we saw is not only that there's a huge overload of assessments, and I think you're talking about actually just assessing the impact of the pandemic itself, but also the lockdown measures and other containment measures. And a real reluctance to move beyond information sharing. So unfortunately, a lot of the coordination mechanisms that are in place were just sharing information. And that actually is not sufficient because unless you're changing what your institution is doing based on the information you're receiving, the information sharing mechanisms are actually just adding an additional layer. So I don't know if I have an answer to your question, but I think that's a really huge point, is that we have to be able to rely on each other's institutions and to move with less than perfect information. And I think some on the evaluation side, what we've seen is some agreements that are now being put in place to mutual reliability on evaluation assessments. And I think that's really the exciting direction to go in. Unfortunately, what we also have seen is a real disconnect between the political level and the technical level. So you might have all partners jointly assessing, for example, the needs on oxygen supply in the country, and then you have a politician or a high-level decision maker who comes in and says, great, we're going to donate this oxygen machine to this hospital, completely out of sync with the national plans that have been developed by multiple technical partners. And we saw the same thing happening on vaccines. So I think anytime you have highly politically driven decision making, it then becomes even more difficult for evaluators to find a foothold in terms of influence and evidence. And that certainly was the case on COVID-19. Thank you for the question about working together, and actually that's one of the things I like the most about the COVID Coalition work, is that we really started from the principle of moving outside of the idea of sort of different categories of countries. I mean, there's nothing better than COVID-19 to show that there's no country that knows what they're doing, and there's no country that has it perfectly right. So every country has something to contribute, and every country has something to learn. And that was sort of the basis of sort of the starting point, coming from a very humble perspective of, you know, let's really work together across all countries. And I think the idea of having a common cause across evaluators is very important, because I do think we can strengthen each other in our different national contexts. So in terms of the joints, the work in Côte d'Ivoire, I think we heard a little bit about it, but I think the real challenge in today's context is also how can we move beyond collaboration in international assistance evaluations and also look at national programs. Because of course, as we saw in COVID-19, though the international assistance provided was very large and was, up until the Ukraine war, was the largest international assistance, and many countries, including China, providing, you know, very high levels of assistance that had never been done before. So very impressive. If you compare that international assistance to domestic spending, it's really just a drop in the bucket, as we say. So I think that's where you see this need for proportionality of where do we focus our efforts, and those national systems being really critical.
Thank you very much, Megan. And I think this really well introduced the short next session, which is more about collaboration among evaluators. So in the spirit of collaboration, the last effort of the day for you, please take this second survey and try to rate, or what do you think about collaboration among evaluators as it is now. Please rate from 1 to 5. 5 is the best rate. I mean, working really, really well. We are doing great. We evaluators collaborate a lot, especially in time of crisis. Option 4, we are going to the right direction. Good effort. We are going into the right direction. Option 3, okay, we have done something, but still very much work in progress. Option 2, we are trying hard, but we are not there yet. And option 1, not at all, no good, honestly, a lot of talking, but not much is happening. So please, from 1 to 5, take 1 second to rate this collaboration. Slightly more positive than I thought. No, so some attempts made, but still work in progress. Others think that it's working really, really well, and there are others think that there are promising. I spoke too. Sorry for that. Now it seems more polarized. So there is honestly not much happening. Is considered by several. Well, maybe we can leave it this going for a while as a background. And I can turn again to you, Megan, maybe since we are discussing about partnership and about how we can really work together better. In your views, you have a lot of experience in that. May I kindly ask you to elaborate a bit? What do you think we need as an evaluation community to collaborate more effectively during crisis, and how platforms like the COVID-19 Global Evaluation Coalition can eventually help support development players better to improve their response mechanism through an enhanced collaboration. Thank you.
Thank you, and thank you everyone for your inputs. Thank you for your inputs on the Mentimeter. That's nice to see as well. I guess I would just have 3 quick thoughts. One is, we looked for opportunities to what we call feeding 2 birds with 1 hand. So finding opportunities where you could both help an individual evaluation unit with their day job. So I think it's unrealistic to expect that we would all devote huge amounts of time to international collaboration. We have to continue to do our day jobs, but often you could find areas that were of mutual interest. And so, for example, we had several examples of country-led evaluations where the international funding partner was able to help provide resources, for example, for Burkina Faso, to evaluate their national COVID-19 response plan. And that was because there was a happy alignment of an evaluation program. This is what the national government was interested in Burkina Faso, but also the Irish government and the Belgian government and the Japanese government were also interested in Burkina Faso at that same moment. And so in a way, it supported both of those objectives. And in contrast, we had other countries where there was a strong interest and there was no international partners. And there it was just very difficult. So looking for opportunities where you're meeting two partners' needs at the same time, and being realistic about the limitations. The second point, I think, is really the individual and the relationship-based and the importance of individuals. And it's a very difficult lesson because you can't really count on having that one person or those 2 or 3 people that really are champions for collaboration. But in COVID-19, in our work, we really saw there were a handful of key individuals who really saw the value of working together and were able to galvanize others and bring everyone to the table. And I think having those relationships, individuals that you've met in person, I do think meeting in person is really important for us as humans to have that sort of face-to-face contact. That then in a crisis moment you can trust people, you can draw on that. At some point we were meeting on a bi-weekly basis or weekly basis even with partners, and we were meeting with each other so often that I remember at one moment our Canadian colleague who was working from home, she moved rooms in her house. And everybody on the call was, "Oh, Isabel, what happened? Where are you? Why is your background different?" And so we were so closely connected, and I think that was actually a key part of collaboration, was this individual element. So, and maybe I'll just leave it there with the two.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Megan. And Eskender, I turn to you to focus a bit on the title of this session about private sector resilience. EIB private sector share is growing very much over the last 2 years. And I wanted to ask you about, from your perspective, how evaluators, especially from institutions with a strong focus on private sector, can try to work together better to support a more effective crisis responses for our institution with a focus on private sector resilience in our region.
Yeah, thank you, Gabriel. Again, you're right. Our institution is almost making a huge stride on financing private sector investment. That's one of our core pillars. So having been myself in my previous career with IFC, I think one area where all of us, all MDBs, could do better is an alignment on methodological framework. For example, during the COVID crisis, you see many of the MDBs deployed a different sort of methodology, for example, a simple trade finance evaluation. So I think one area we should look at, we may not be able to make it 100% the same, at least that saves time, resource, and energy. And the second one, we're talking about crisis, right? So we should really harness technology and innovation. How can we really get real-time data using all these available digital technologies, including AI, especially in our own among the 68 projects? Almost 60% of them were co-financed with World Bank, AIIB, and one project in Vietnam with IFC. So how can we really use this platform to real-time accessing data with those co-financing projects? You can imagine, even those co-financing which have mutual interest in it. So harnessing technology and innovation for the better alignment. I think the last most important for me is how do we at least collaborate on the most important cross-cutting issue which every institution at the center of its climate action or climate crisis. So at least that's one of the entry points where we can really collaborate on a real time, come up with some methodological framework, how to really measure the value addition. We are talking about from billions to trillions now. So the role of evaluator is much, much important than now in a very global changing world where we are moving from multilateralism to more protectionism. So result matters. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Eskender. I do agree very much on that. And Tanya, I come to you because also EIB Group has a very strong focus on private sector. What kind of practical, real tools and actions we can put in place for us, for evaluators to work better together, to learn more from each other, and then to make a bigger difference for for our institution when they are preparing their own crisis responses.
Thanks, really. So I fully agree with the points raised by Megan and Eskender. And I'm just going back to a point you were mentioning, Veronique, when you were saying the private sector doesn't have time to wait. I mean, no one has time to wait, of course, but the private sector indeed is on a different timeline than us. I'd like to reflect on actually the collaboration we had during the pandemic. I know you were the lead, Gabriele, in helping us agree on the methodology on how to conduct real-time rapid evaluations. We were all faced with this issue, and I think we have a nice outcome coming out of this with the guidance on how to approach these rapid assessments. So this was done as a working group within the evaluation cooperation group. So I think that we've learned a lot from this experience. We have some tangible outcomes from it, for example, this one. What we're maybe missing on a systemic level is preparing ourselves as evaluation functions for the next crisis, as I was mentioning earlier. And maybe one way where we could work together is coming up with mechanisms that we could trigger. And I think this goes back to the question I think, Emily, you were asking about how can we for the next crisis be able to come together as evaluation functions rapidly. So I think it would be nice if we took some time to reflect on this. Also, because today we've all worked together during the pandemic, but some of us will move on to other functions. We are also aging, and younger people will come and replace us. And there's this tacit knowledge that might disappear with us if we don't capture it today. So I'd just like to see us capture that knowledge so we can share it with future generations of evaluators. Thanks.
Thank you, Tanya. You look very young for already thinking about this matter. Thank you very much. Veronique, I'm happy to end this row of questions with you, also to bring us together and to help us put together these different aspects we touch. So what are your thoughts? How evaluator can really practically come together to help the MDBs, more MDB as a system, or development partners together to be more effective, more integrated, more complementary when it comes to crisis response mechanisms? How we can overcome the existing barriers for achieving that?
That may be a lot to expect. Okay, might be a lot to expect. What I can say, a lot of really great things were already said. Why would we want to work together? It's mainly for two things. Because we can complement each other, which means that we bring different perspectives. As evaluators, we like to triangulate our information. That's a great way to, even more than triangulate, is to have maybe on the same topic, different perspective, looking at different contexts. What worked in one context may not work in another. It can help us be less biased and more nuanced in our analysis. But it's also because we can amplify each other. I think it's, one of you mentioned the word credibility. When I think it was you, Megan, of course the coalition, having all of these logos, gave a lot of credibility to the messages that were shared. And I think that's where we have a power that we are not using enough, is that we can amplify each other and have a voice, especially for the climate crisis or for some ongoing crisis, that could be much more influential if we join together rather than if we each say our own, give our own messages. And how can we do it? I think what came from the survey was that we were kind of halfway, maybe not even halfway, but some progress have been made, and we had a lot of examples of the progress made, but we still have a long way to go. Of course, there's the low-hanging fruits, sharing information. I think we're pretty good already at doing that. We still need to improve, but we're pretty good at sharing information. And but what we still need to do, working together, is be more systematic. So there was this G20 call for all MDBs to work more as a system. I think us as evaluators should also think about how we can work together more as a system. It doesn't mean that we need to do everything together, so it's beyond joint evaluation that are helpful and useful, but cannot be done at a really huge scale. But it's more about being more coordinated. We can identify together priorities because we share a lot of priorities. And we could identify priorities that we want to look at and coordinate our evaluation, and then making sure that we have indicators that we can share, approaches that are similar, so that we can at the end be confident enough to compare our results. And that's something we do within the evaluation cooperation group, but we can do even further. Like we exchange our work program once they are already approved. Why don't we do it a little bit before we discuss? We should maybe discuss our work program before we even propose our work program to our board, so that we can pre-identify areas where we could implement the evaluation at the same time with similar approaches. And we're starting to do that with the AIIB, with one special chapter on the influence of evaluation. So that at the end we know that 1 year from now, a few months from now, we'll be able to compare our findings and to give the findings of the other institution to our board, and we know that they will really value that. And all of that is important. We need to work more as a system. The only thing that makes me very optimistic that it can happen is that there is now the technology that can help us do that. Before it was, and we had a few examples of having hundreds of pages, thousands of pages of results to go through in a minimum time, to be able to give feedback from, or information coming from different evaluations. Now, what you were describing, Megan, having to answer questions about what can you say on food security during crisis. Right now, with some of the tools that we're developing, EVA in AIIB, lessons learned in EBRD, you can use natural language, write a good prompt, and you can have access, even just using ChatGPT, but I would be a bit more cautious. But if you say only using evaluation, independent evaluation from renowned organization, then you can have some answers already in a few minutes. So I'm very, maybe too enthusiastic, but I'm very optimistic about how we can use artificial intelligence and new technology to share information, to work much more as a system. And that means also that we need to be willing maybe to invest together, to share database, and to be real about mutual reliance. That means we should trust each other's data, and we should be able to come together to have a shared database so that we can extract information that comes not just from our evaluations, but also evaluation from others. So I think we're just at the beginning of it, but there is a lot that can be done already using this type of tools. I'll stop here with this positive note, hopefully.
No, thank you, Veronica. I was wondering indeed when you would have mentioned artificial intelligence. Veronica is a big fan, and we're happy for that. Great. Natalia, you are still here with us. Would you like to share a few quick points?
Your boss asked you for your views. I think everything has been said. Since I'm the youngest person on the panel, I guess I can highlight something Veronique was saying, sharing information. I think sharing data is of critical importance. Just one anecdotal story, when I was at IMF evaluating the COVID-19 response, we spent months actually collecting simple data points, data on commitments and disbursement of COVID-19 response across all of our RFIs. So obviously look forward to using more of AI in the future, but we all very much know it's about the inputs. So our willingness to share data is the key. So I'll finish on that. Thank you, Marcos.
Thank you, Natalia. Any final point from you, dear colleagues? One final question for our panel. DJ Manny, please, thank you very much.
Thanks, Manny Jimenez from ADB. I just wondered if my colleagues from the other MDBs, EBRD, EIB, AIIB, what your thoughts were on two questions that we've grappled with in the ECG and others. One is on methodology for real-time evaluation to respond to crises. And we have, for all its faults, we used to have a fairly, what I think is rigorous OECD DAC criteria to use in evaluating investment projects in particular. But I think we've seen that there's been much more of a variety of methods being used to tackle real-time evaluation. I'm just wondering whether you feel satisfied that we've learned enough to come up with sort of a guidebook, if you like, not a template on how to do these things. The second is, our organizations have a lot of units that monitor actions, especially during crises. In ADB, we've got a strategic group, we have a research group, and others. And my question is, how do you define the dividing line between what independent evaluation units should do and what all the other units in these large organizations ought to do? Or just two questions for reflection.
Thank you, Manny. Two very easy questions. So, may I ask each one of the panelists to maybe say in a few words, a couple of reflections on the questions Manny posed, starting from you, Kryg.
Yes, thank you, Manny, for these difficult questions. For the first one, for the methodology of real-time evaluation, we were not the best position in independent evaluation departments of IFIs to work on real-time evaluation, but thinking about it afterwards and meeting with other colleagues, mainly coming from humanitarian activities or even NGOs, they have been using that tool for a long time. We are new, it's new for us, but they have developed quite good methodologies to do it, and I think we can learn a lot from their experience. There is this working group in the Evaluation Cooperation Group working on some guidance and even just on definition. What do we mean by real-time evaluation? What do we mean by rapid assessment? What is the difference? What are the methodology we should use? Because of course we were talking about trade-offs, but we don't want too much trade-offs. I mean, we need to be rigorous. We still need to be comfortable enough and credible enough that the information we are collecting and the way we are collecting the information and analyzing are rigorous and solid enough to lead to some good findings. Usually, in the methodology, usually we look at more of the relevance, where is the money spent and is it responsive to the demand of the clients, not just, so it's kind of internal and external coherence. Outside the DAC, I know that we are looking also at the agility, how the institution has been responsive to the demand of the clients and the changing demand of the clients. In the case of EBRD, one of our findings for COVID was to say that it was very fast, quick to respond, but not agile. And management, they were very upset about these findings because they thought they had been very agile. But with the way we were thinking about agility was that they were very fast, yes, but agility meant that they could have adapted to the changing demand of the clients over the months. You know, when after a few, it was liquidity crisis first, and then they needed some other type of support, and there was not this agility. Just to say that you need to adapt the DAC criteria for that, but I think that if we put our heads together, and that's what has been done with the ECG working group, and I think the guidance, I don't know, guidebook, how do we call it, guidebook? It was led by Gabriele and also colleagues from AIIB with collaboration from other IFIs, ADB, etc. We were trying to come to a common understanding about the type of methodology we would be comfortable enough to consider as good practice for IFIs in times of crisis. So I hope that we can find some good grounds there, but that's it's a bit tricky. For the monitoring crisis, collection of data, and making sure that we draw the limit between what management does, what independent evaluation does. I remember for the COVID crisis it was a bit difficult at the time. Some of our colleagues, with the experience they had in the independent evaluation department, were willing to collaborate very, very directly with management. And it was difficult in a way to say, no, that's not your role, because if you are too much involved, then there will be some conflict of interest, and you won't be as additional as you could be if you keep your position as independent evaluation a step outside. If we are comfortable with the data they collect, if we think that it's rigorous enough, I see independent evaluation role as maybe providing an external perspective on the data. We may not have the same analysis. If we're not comfortable with the quality of the data, I see our role as the one having to collect more data, and especially conducted what we usually do, interviews, and doing our own due diligence to collect the data that we feel comfortable enough to use. But I think it's a very important point is to make sure that we still remain in our position of a third party, looking at with a little bit of distance at the work that has been done, to be able to provide an unbiased perspective, and to be able to provide also some perspective that can be constructive and can help also improve the implementation. I don't know if it answers your questions, but I'm sure my colleagues will complement it. Thank you.
Please, Tanya, Eskender, or Megan.
Sorry, it's because we work together on the RTU. So just very quickly, I fully agree with everything Veronique has just said. Maybe just to complement a bit from the EIB perspective. On the rapid assessments or real-time evaluations, I think for us what's important is indeed to have a common understanding of what it is, but we're not looking for a straitjacket. I think that if anything, these types of crises have shown that we need to adapt the types of methods we use. So what we were looking for was more options and approaches on how we can do this rigorously, but maybe not sort of comprehensive straitjacket kind of methods. So I think this this guidebook that we'll be developing within the ECG will help at least provide some real tracks that we can then adapt to our needs as the next crisis unfolds. Or maybe, as Megan was saying, use some of these tools in our regular times for other purposes as well. On our role as an independent evaluation function vis-à-vis management, this is indeed something that we've been grappling with quite a bit, and sometimes it works well, and sometimes there's been some tensions. We're trying to be more systematic in the way we coordinate internally with different functions that, so monitoring and evaluation, but also the research department, internal audit as well. So when we're developing our work program, we really try to coordinate and fit with what they will be doing. As Veronique was saying, when they produce data that we think is credible and reliable, we might use some of this in our evaluations going forward. Maybe just one point that we have found is that as an independent evaluation, of course we have tried to provide evidence in real time or rapid evidence when it's needed, but we also keep an eye on the long game. It's important for us to come back to a topic. So for example, in the case of COVID-19, we produced a rapid assessment, but we're now about to finish a second evaluation, but we're now coming back to look at some of the tools the EIB deployed at the time of the pandemic to see whether they were effective or not. Other parts of management have moved on. They're not going to come back to this tool to draw the lessons. So I think on this, we have some added value as an independent function, because we will come back to these topics that we felt we've only looked at quickly to then complement this and draw lessons for the future. Thanks.
Eskender and Megan, very briefly.
Yeah, briefly. So I think let me more articulate on the second one. As I said, on the methodological question, our evaluation still is on motion, so it's hard to say its effectiveness, right? So, but the second question, mine, was a very important question. How do you really strike a balance between independence and collaboration? I think in AIIB we have a motto called independent yet engaged. What this means actually is, for example, on this pandemic evaluation we are doing, the management has already carried review 2 of their own evaluation. We review it, we communicate with them, but the lens we are looking at, when it came to the learning aspect, we pretty much share the same experience. But also when it came to from independence and accountability, we do it independently. And also at institutional level, my acting managing director, who's sitting at the back waiting, is now a member of observer at the senior management committee as evaluator. So, and also I have access to review all senior management documentation, not only on the project that we evaluate. I think that's really in action, independent yet engaged. But when it came to evaluation, we do our own independent judgment, objectively wasn't interference of anything, even as Veronica said, we use their data, but validation and accuracy is up to us. How much deep we can use those data. Thank you.
I'm not sure I have much to add on the points, but on real-time evaluation, I think it's a real challenge. You know, I thought in early 2020 when we were debating the topic, and we actually had it inserted into our program of work and budget, which is significant for us because then we have to report on it. And the term real-time was really appealing to all of our stakeholders. And then in the evaluation community, there was huge difference of opinion. And some arguing, you know, this is just completely not our job, that's monitoring's job, we shouldn't touch it. And others much more interested in exploring it. So I'll be interested to see what ECG comes up with. But I guess my sort of gut level reaction would be to say this seems like a very uninteresting debate to anybody except ourselves, and maybe the monitoring and results people. So I just wonder if, like, the question of should we call it monitoring, should we call it real time, should we call it, you know, something else, strategic advising, doesn't matter. I think it is maybe sometimes we get a little bit too into our own sort of barriers, but really what I would say is, you know, we're in quite, and maybe it comes from our members who tend to have much smaller evaluation units compared to the MDBs. So they're, I would say, kind of who has capacity to do something useful and come at it from that cost effectiveness perspective about the evaluation or the monitoring activity, and not get too caught up on what you end up calling the thing. Thanks.
Thank you, Megan. Fantastic discussion. We have finished. Let me just say thank you very much to the panelists, Veronique, Tanya, Eskender, Megan, Natalia. Thank you to your organizer. Thank you very much. Thank you all for your participation, your patience. Thank you very much.